take Mrs. Carew's gladness as a matter of course, which, to one who had no gladness, was most provoking. It was during the second week of Pollyanna's stay that Mrs. Carew's annoyance overflowed into irritable remonstrance. The immediate cause thereof was Pollyanna's glowing conclusion to a story about one of her Ladies' Aiders. She was playing the game, Mrs. Carew, but maybe you don't know what the game is. I'll tell you. It's a lovely game." But Mrs. Carew held up her hand. "Never mind, Pollyanna," she demurred. "I know all about the game. My sister told me. And I must say that I should not care for it." "Why, of course not, Mrs. Carew!" exclaimed Pollyanna in quick apology. "I didn't mean the game for you. You couldn't play it, of course." "I couldn't play it!" ejaculated Mrs. Carew, who thought she would not play this silly game, was in no mood to be told that she could not. "Why, no, don't you see?" laughed Pollyanna gleefully. "The game is to find something in everything to be glad about. And you couldn't even begin to hunt, for there isn't anything about you but what you could be glad about. There wouldn't be any game to it for you. Don't you see?" Mrs. Carew flushed angrily. In her annoyance she said more than perhaps she meant to say. "Well, no, Pollyanna, I can't say that I do," she differed coldly. "As it happens, you see, I can find nothing whatever to be glad for." For a moment Pollyanna stared blankly. Then she fell back in amazement. "Why, Mrs. Carew!" she breathed. "Well, what is there for me?" challenged the woman, forgetting all about for the moment that she was never going to allow Pollyanna to preach. "Why, there's everything," murmured Pollyanna, still with that dazed unbelief. There's this beautiful house." "It's just a place to eat and sleep, and I don't want to eat and sleep." "But there are all these perfectly lovely things," faltered Pollyanna. "I'm tired of them." "And your automobile that will take you anywhere." "I don't want to go anywhere." Pollyanna quite gasped aloud. "But think of the people and things you could see, Mrs. Carew." "They would not interest me, Pollyanna." Once again Pollyanna stared in amazement. The troubled frown on her face deepened. "But, Mrs. Carew, I don't see," she urged. "Always before there have been bad things for folks to play the game on, and the badder they are the more fun 'tis to get them out find the things to be glad for, I mean. But where there aren't any bad things, I shouldn't know how to play the game myself." There was no answer for a time. Mrs. Carew sat with her eyes out the window. Gradually the angry rebellion on her face changed to a look of hopeless sadness. Very slowly then she turned and said: "Pollyanna, I had thought I wouldn't tell you this, but I've decided that I will. I'm going to tell you why nothing that I have can make me glad." And she began the story of Jamie, the little 4-year-old boy who, 8 long years before, had stepped as into another world, leaving the door fast shut between. "And you've never seen him since, anywhere?" faltered Pollyanna, with tear-wet eyes, when the story was done. "Never." "But we'll find him, Mrs. Carew. I'm sure we'll find him." Mrs. Carew shook her head sadly. "But I can't. I've looked everywhere, even in foreign lands." "But he must be somewhere." "He may be dead, Pollyanna." Pollyanna gave a quick cry. "Oh, no, Mrs. Carew, please don't say that. Let's imagine he's alive. We can do that, and that'll help. And when we get him imagined alive, we can just as well imagine we're going to find him, and that'll help a whole lot more." "But I'm afraid he's dead, Pollyanna," choked Mrs. Carew. "You don't know it for sure, do you?" besought the little girl anxiously. "No." "Well, then, you're just imagining it," maintained Pollyanna in triumph. "And if you can imagine him dead, you can just as well imagine him alive, and it'll be a whole lot nicer while you're doing it, don't you see? And some day I'm just sure you'll find him. Why, Mrs. Carew, you can play the game now. You can play it on Jamie. You can be glad every day, for every day brings you just one day nearer to the time when you're going to find him. See?" But Mrs. Carew did not see. She rose drearily to her feet and said: "No, no, child, you don't understand. You don't understand. Now run away, please, and read, or do anything you like. My head aches. I'm going to lie down." And Pollyanna, with a troubled, sober face, slowly left the room. CHAPTER 5